Hey guys, Mr. Face here. In our update video, we had mentioned that we are going to be moving some of my creepypastas here. What I'm about to read isn't exactly a creepypasta. Quick history lesson. Before we were Lakes Region streaming, Lakes Region gaming, under the banner of Lakes Region, we actually had a YouTube channel named Shinigami Inc. And on that channel, we had a show called Nightfall. Nightfall was a series both Nick and I came up with, and I started writing a short novelization alongside it, and I actually just found that recently. So I'm going to read an excerpt from that. So I do hope you enjoy. This is an excerpt called The Guys in the Camp. The camp was still. The mist drifted lazily across the dew-moistened field. The clouds, instead of their wispy, white, puffy shape, had now become a solid sheet of gray which had cast a deep blue shadow across the entire camp and surrounding area. There were changes in all four men at the camp, subtle at first. Andrew spent most of his time feeling exhausted and not moving much. Occasionally he would skulk his way to the other side of the camp where the cafeteria was. There was a coffee pot that sometimes worked, though whether he wanted to drink the coffee was a different story entirely. It was as black as tar and tasted about the same. After attempting to drink the molten concoction, he would usually try it and find his own way out of the camp with whatever energy he had left. Sometimes, in desperation, he would muster up the strength and run through the exit, only to be disappointingly looped back into the other side. There was no escape. Nick was a different story. He seemed to be active all the time, exploring every inch of every building in the camp, desperately looking for something that would give him an answer as to how to get out. Despite being a religious man, he never had any interest in visiting the church that stood at the edge of the woods. He wouldn't even get near the large wooden edifice, not even close enough to the doors to pray. Anytime he got near it, he felt himself getting a migraine. At some points, when he tempted fate and got too close, the migraine would become so intense he would collapse and literally have to drag himself away from it. From time to time, he found himself screaming at the empty place of worship, cursing at it even. He felt as if it were mocking him. AJ spent most of his time sitting in the camp administrative office, trying to retain some form of normality. He would use the computer to work on other projects that he had back in New York. However, the computer was so old that it couldn't save any of the work that he had been doing. In some odd way, this didn't bother him at all. He would simply repeat the same work every day. His temper was also something that underwent a subtle but sudden change. Rather than being level-headed, he would often explode on whoever disturbed him or distracted him from his endless chain of old digital paperwork. Over time, he developed a nervous twitch. He would mutter to himself as he was working, and sometimes have one-sided conversations. Sometimes he would honestly sound apologetic and meek. He would promise how he would do better and not make any more mistakes. It got to the point where he seldom left the office. The only person he wanted to talk to, or even be near, was his phantom supervisor. Taylor perhaps had become the most distant of all. He stood behind the altar each day, just staring at the thick pine forest that seemingly went on forever. When he became too tired to stand, he would sit, and when his upper torso ached, he would lay, never breaking eye contact with the woods. He would just lay there, silent, almost unblinking, day in, day out. The only time he wouldn't be looking at the woods is when he went to sleep. Sleep came, but it never came to stay. He'd be awake in an hour. Though filled with energy, he still wouldn't move. The woods are what he focused on. On rare occasion, he would talk in the company of one of the other men. He would groan or sigh sometimes, tell you that he was busy, all the while sounding aloof. The last time any of the men tried to speak to him is when Nick had asked him what he was doing. Taylor simply answered with one word: waiting. What felt like an eternity later, Andrew lifted his head in a painful daze. His brain ached. He wasn't entirely sure why. He had never felt sick or in pain, just tired. He could have been uncomfortable for a multitude of reasons: lack of nicotine, or decent caffeine, which were two of the substances he consumed most on a daily basis. Perhaps his mind hurt from bending on thoughts of the dampening fog that seemed to linger in the camp at all times, or the fact he didn't remember how he got to sleep the night before. He sighed. So it wasn't a dream, he said, sounding utterly defeated. He stood up, hearing each one of his joints crack in very off-putting and disturbing symphony. He looked out the window. He knew he'd been asleep for some time, due to the fact that the cigarette that was left burning was long burnt out and cold, and yet the lighting outside had not changed. It hadn't changed since they arrived. He felt slow, like he'd been drinking straight whiskey the night before. He dragged himself outside of the cabin into the dimly lit morning, or what he assumed was morning. He didn't know what time it was anymore. He didn't know what to think anymore, period. The grasp of time had become a distant concept. He thought back to the first morning he and Nick had arrived at the camp. It was like this. It felt like this yesterday. And it had been like it every day, ever since. Something today was different. Andrew had the will to actually be productive. Even with a splitting headache, he opened the door to the rustic cabin and stepped outside in the field. Took a deep breath and stepped down the old wooden stairs into the wet grass. He put his hands deep in his pockets. He felt something. Something dry and round. He pulled out the object only to be overcome with joy. For the first time in who knows how long, Andrew felt himself smile. In his hands, he had a cigarette. His last cigarette. He removed the lighter from his other pocket and flicked it a couple times before the flame went steady. He took a deep inhale and closed his eyes. The end of the cigarette felt warm and dry. Something finally different from the cold, damp abyss that was the camp. Meanwhile, across the camp in the infirmary, Nick was feeling particularly good as well. He sat at what he believed to be a nurse's desk and reclined slightly in the office chair. He felt he didn't have to search for anything suddenly. He took a deep breath and smiled. For in the moment, in the dry office, he could relax. He began to feel himself drift off to sleep. This was the first time in what felt like a week that Nick had closed his eyes for more than a millisecond. Back in the camp office, AJ plucked away at the computer furiously, occasionally swatting at the air as if to get some invisible pest away from him. He stopped and stared at the dusty computer screen. He blinked. He blinked again. This time he let his eyes close for a moment. A couple moments. When he opened them, he simply said, "I finished this months ago." Happiness flooded through him in that moment of clarity. These are the blueprints for the Hannison Tower. This project was tossed out months ago. He stood up from the chair and started walking towards the door. For the first time in a long time, there were no whispers from his unseen supervisor. He stepped out into the cool mist and smiled. Nick eventually woke from the relaxing nap, feeling like a new man. Rubbed his eyes with his hands for a moment before his vision came into focus. He saw the blurry outline of someone coming towards him. He blinked. The blurred vision faded away to find that nobody was there. He dismissed it as him still being in a dream state. He walked down the dusty hallway out to the front door and pushed on the door, surprised to see AJ and Andrew having a conversation. They weren't talking about where they were, or how long they've been there, or how to get out. Rather, plans for the future. Andrew turned and saw Nick. "Hey, you're looking well rested," Andrew said, in an almost uncomfortably good mood. "Yeah, for the first time. I got some well-needed sleep," Nick said, still groggy. Their moment of happiness was interrupted by the sound of a scream. A scream coming from behind the altar.